They called it Der Seelenkeller, the soul cellar. Not on any official map, not in any engineering log, but in the whispered slang of the 167th Infantry Division, stationed near Kharkiv in the winter of 1942. The name spread like frost through the ranks. Bunker 66 wasn't the deepest, the largest, or the most fortified position on the line, but it was the only one no man would enter after midnight. Not out of cowardice, not out of superstition, at least not at first, but because something had happened there. Something the officers tried to bury, something the chaplain refused to bless, something that left 3 men dead, not from bullets or frostbite, but from what the division's medical log chillingly described as acute soul collapse. This is not a ghost story. It is a warning about what happens when a regime weaponizes belief, when science bows to myth, when men, already broken by war, are told that the darkness beneath their feet is not empty, but hungry. And in that telling, they begin to believe it too. To understand Bunker 66, we must first understand the ground it was built on. In late 1941, as the German advance stalled outside Moscow, the Wehrmacht began constructing a network of reinforced bunkers along the Eastern Front, concrete tombs meant to hold the line through the Soviet winter. Most were utilitarian: 12 feet underground, steel-reinforced walls, ventilation shafts, machine gun nests. But in the Kharkiv sector, something different was ordered. By direct command of Heinrich Himmler's Ahnenerbe, the SS's pseudo-scientific research division, a single bunker was to be built not for defense, but for ritual. Officially, it was designated Bunker 66, part of the standard fortification grid. Unofficially, it was known among SS engineers as Projekt Erde, Project Earth. The design was unusual. Instead of a straight corridor, it featured a circular inner chamber, its walls embedded with quartz crystals and iron filings, materials the Ahnenerbe believed could amplify spiritual resonance. The floor was laid with black basalt tiles, arranged in a pattern resembling the black sun, Himmler's occult symbol of Aryan rebirth. And deep beneath the chamber, a sealed vault was constructed, accessible only by a hidden hatch. What was placed in that vault was never recorded in any surviving document, but soldiers stationed nearby reported strange things. Low humming at night, flickering lights when no generator was running, a cold spot in the corridor that made breath fog even in summer. At first, these were dismissed as stress, fatigue, or the creak of settling concrete. Then men started disappearing. The first incident occurred on November 3, 1942. Private Klaus Reinhardt, a 22-year-old radio operator, was assigned to check the comms equipment in Bunker 66 during a routine night patrol. He entered at 11:45 p.m. When he didn't return by 1 a.m., a search party was sent. They found him in the circular chamber, curled in a fetal position, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just terror. The division's doctor ruled it a cardiac event brought on by extreme stress, but the men who carried him out swore his skin was ice cold and that the bunker smelled of ozone and burnt hair. 2 weeks later, Corporal Erich Vogel entered Bunker 66 to retrieve a forgotten map. He emerged 20 minutes later, babbling incoherently about voices in the walls and a face in the stone. He was evacuated to a field hospital in Lviv, where he died 3 days later, still whispering the same phrase over and over. It's not empty, it's waiting. By December, a silent rule had formed. No one entered Bunker 66 after dark. Not even the officers, not even the SS liaison who had overseen its construction. Because by then, everyone had heard the stories. That if you stood outside the entrance at midnight, you could hear faint chanting in a language no one recognized. That the ventilation shaft exhaled air that tasted like blood. And that the quartz in the walls glowed faintly blue when the moon was full. And worst of all, that if you looked into the peephole in the bunker door after midnight, you wouldn't see darkness. You'd see something looking back.
The truth, as always, was more complicated and more human. Bunker 66 was not haunted by spirits, but it was saturated with fear, suggestion, and state-sanctioned myth. The Ahnenerbe had long believed that certain locations on Earth possessed telluric energy, a mystical force that could be harnessed for racial purification, prophecy, or even resurrection. Himmler himself had ordered SS units to conduct rituals at ancient sites across Europe. The Externstein Rock Formation, the Wewelsburg Castle crypts, even Stonehenge. In the chaos of the Eastern Front, Bunker 66 became an unofficial experiment. Declassified SS correspondence from 1942, recovered from a burned-out staff car near Kharkov, reveals that Obersturmführer Dieter Kruger, an Ahnenerbe field officer, had been ordered to test the psychological effects of sacred geometry on frontline morale. In plain terms, to see if soldiers who believed they were fighting on holy ground would fight harder, endure longer, and fear death less. Bunker 66 was his laboratory. He didn't summon demons, he planted ideas. He told engineers to embed protective runes in the concrete. He left ancient Slavic artifacts in the side rooms. He played low-frequency recordings through hidden speakers, unaudible to conscious hearing, but felt as vibration in the bones. And he spread rumors. Not openly, but through casual comments at mess hall tables, through leaked documents, through staged discoveries of strange symbols scratched into the walls. The goal was not to create a haunted house. It was to create unshakable belief. Because a soldier who believes he is protected by ancient forces is harder to break. But belief, once unleashed, cannot be controlled. And in the freezing, sleep-deprived hell of the Eastern Front, where men saw comrades freeze solid in their foxholes and heard the screams of the wounded echo for miles, the line between myth and madness was already thin. Bunker 66 didn't create the horror. It gave it a home. The final straw came on January 17, 1943. And Soviet artillery barrage hit the bunker complex, collapsing the entrance to Bunker 65, but leaving Bunker 66 intact. That night, during a lull in the shelling, Sergeant Major Hans Weber ordered Private Felix Brandt to check for structural damage. Brandt refused. "I won't go in there after midnight," he said, voice shaking. "No one will." Weber, a hardened veteran of Poland and France, scoffed. "Superstitious nonsense. I'll go myself." He entered Bunker 66 at 12:03 a.m. He never came out. A rescue team found him an hour later, standing in the circular chamber, facing the inner wall. He was alive, but unresponsive. His eyes tracked nothing. His hands were pressed flat against the stone, as if listening. They dragged him out. For 3 days he neither ate nor spoke. On the 4th morning he walked into the frozen no-man's land between the lines and kept walking, straight into Soviet machine gun fire. After that, even the officers stopped pretending. Bunker 66 was sealed, not with orders, not with locks, but with silence. The entrance was buried under rubble, the ventilation shafts were capped, and a new rule was added to the patrol roster: avoid Sector Gamma after 2200. No explanation was given. None was needed, because by then every man in the division knew. Bunker 66 was not a shelter. It was a threshold, and whatever waited on the other side was not meant for the living.
The silence around Bunker 66 did not last. By February 1943, the rumors had spread beyond the 167th Infantry Division. Supply convoys from Poltava refused to stop within 2 kilometers of Sector Gamma after dark. Medical evac teams rerouted their ambulances. Even Soviet reconnaissance patrols, usually fearless in the frozen wasteland between the lines, began avoiding the area, whispering among themselves about the German soul bunker. But the truth was not in the whispers. It was buried. In March 1943, as the German lines collapsed under the Soviet counteroffensive at Kharkov, a Wehrmacht engineering unit was ordered to demolish the bunker complex to prevent its capture. Lieutenant Armin Felk, a 29-year-old sapper with a degree in archaeology from Heidelberg, was assigned to plant charges in Bunker 66. He refused. Not out of fear, though he admitted later he felt a deep unease near the entrance, but out of professional curiosity. The bunker's construction didn't match standard Wehrmacht specs. The concrete was mixed with crushed bone. The rebar was bent into spirals, not grids. And the inner chamber, it felt wrong. He wrote in a letter to his sister, later recovered from his effects. The acoustics were unnatural. A whisper in the center echoed as if from 100 throats, and the air, it tasted like metal and old rain. Against orders, Falk delayed the demolition. Instead, he brought a crowbar and a flashlight. What he found behind the false wall in the circular chamber changed everything. It was a vault, small, sealed with a lead-lined door, marked only with a single rune, the Sig rune, used by the SS not just as a symbol, but as a spiritual amplifier. Inside, he discovered not weapons, not gold, but documents. Dozens of them. Field reports from the Ahnenerbe, handwritten notes from Obersturmführer Kruger, audio reel logs, and a leather-bound journal titled Projekt Erde, Observations on Telluric Resonance and Soldier Morale. Falk read it that night by the dim light of a trench candle, and for the first time he understood. Bunker 66 was never meant to be a fortress. It was a psychic weapon. The journal revealed the full scope of Projekt Erde. Obersturmführer Kruger had not been testing superstition. He was conducting a controlled experiment in belief engineering. Drawing on esoteric theories from pre-war occultists like Karl Maria Willigut, the so-called Rasputin of Himmler, Kruger believed that human consciousness could be shaped by environment, not just through propaganda, but through architecture, sound, and subliminal suggestion. Bunker 66 was designed to do 3 things. 1. Induce a state of heightened suggestibility through infrasound, known to cause anxiety, dread, and visual hallucinations. 2. Anchor that suggestibility to a mythic narrative, in this case the idea that the bunker was built on an ancient Slavic burial mound, a gateway between worlds. And 3. Exploit sleep deprivation and combat stress to blur the line between reality and hallucination. The quartz crystals in the walls? Not mystical, but they did resonate at specific frequencies when exposed to the bunker's hidden speakers, creating a faint, disorienting hum that soldiers interpreted as voices. The cold spot? A deliberate airflow design that pulled frigid air from a buried ice chamber, making the inner room 10 degrees colder than the corridor, triggering primal fear responses. The face in the stone? A bas-relief carving, barely visible in low light, of a distorted human visage, placed at eye level in the darkest corner where sleep-deprived eyes would project meaning onto shadow. Kruger's notes were chilling in their clinical detachment. Subject 47 entered at 23:45 hours. After 12 minutes of exposure to 17 Hz infrasound and ambient chanting, Slavic funeral dirge looped. Subject reported a presence behind me. When asked to describe it, he said, "It knows my name." This is not fear of the unknown. This is fear of the known, of guilt, of memory, of the self. And it is far more potent. Falk realized with dawning horror that the bunker wasn't haunted. It was designed to make men haunt themselves, and it was working. But the most disturbing discovery was not in the journal. It was on the audio reels. Kruger had recorded every test. Falk played the first one on a portable wire recorder salvaged from an abandoned signals truck. The sound was scratchy, distant, but unmistakable. A man's voice, whispering in German. "I left him behind. I could have saved him. Why me?" Then a low hum, a faint chanting in what sounded like Old Church Slavonic. Then silence. Then a scream. Not of pain, but of recognition. Falk played it 3 times. On the third, he heard something new. Beneath the scream, a second voice, almost identical to the first, whispering, "You did this." He never played it again. But he transcribed the words, and in his report to Division Command, marked "for eyes only," he wrote, "Projekt Erde is not occult. It is psychological warfare turned inward. The enemy is not in the bunker. The enemy is the soldier's own conscience, amplified by design. To destroy this place is not enough. It must be forgotten." His report was ignored. The bunker was demolished 3 days later. But the recordings, the journal, Falk kept them. He knew the truth was too dangerous to bury, and too important to burn.
While the Germans grappled with their own creation, the Soviets had their own fears. Unbeknownst to the Wehrmacht, Soviet reconnaissance units had been monitoring Bunker 66 for weeks. Not for tactical value, but because their own soldiers were reporting strange phenomena. According to declassified Red Army field reports from February 1943, patrols near Sector Gamma began refusing night missions. When pressed, they spoke of a black hole in the earth that sucked the warmth from your bones. One lieutenant wrote, "My men say the German bunker is cursed, that it eats souls. I do not believe in curses, but last night I stood 300 meters from it, and I felt watched, not by eyes, by something older." The Soviet High Command dismissed it as fascist psychological trickery, but they took precautions. Artillery units were ordered to shell the area randomly at night, not to destroy, but to break the silence. Because silence, they understood, was the real weapon. In the endless white void of the Eastern Front winter, where temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius and men went days without sleep, the mind craved noise, a radio crackle, a comrade's snore, even the howl of wind. But Bunker 66 offered none of that. Instead, it offered a different kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't rest on the ears but presses on the chest, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat like a drum, the kind that lets the past whisper louder than the present. And in that quiet, every man became his own interrogator. Why did you survive? What did you do to live? Who did you leave behind? The bunker didn't answer. It just listened. And in listening, it made them listen too. The psychological toll was immense. U.S. Army psychiatrists studying post-war German veterans would later identify a pattern they called place-based trauma, a condition where a specific location becomes so saturated with fear and memory that the mere thought of it triggers panic, dissociation, or fugue states. But in 1943, there was no name for it. There was only the rule: don't go near Bunker 66 after midnight. Even after it was destroyed, the
the fear lingered. Men who had never entered it reported nightmares of standing in a circular room surrounded by whispering walls. Some woke screaming, convinced they'd been inside. Others developed an aversion to basements, tunnels, even subway stations. The bunker was gone, but the imprint remained. Because the true horror of Projekt Erde was not the technology. It was the realization that the most terrifying prison is the one you build inside your own mind. And once you've lived in it, you can never fully leave. In April 1943, as the German army retreated west, a Wehrmacht chaplain named Father Joseph Meyer arrived at the ruins of Sector Gamma. He had heard the stories, the disappearances, the madness, the sealed vault. Unlike the officers, he did not dismiss them as superstition. He believed them. Not because he thought demons walked the earth, but because he knew the weight of guilt. Before the war, he had been a parish priest in Munich. He had heard confessions for 20 years, and he knew that the human soul does not need ghosts to be haunted. It only needs memory. So on the night of April 12th, Good Friday, he returned to the rubble of Bunker 66 with a vial of holy water, a crucifix, and a Bible. He did not perform an exorcism. He performed a reconciliation. Kneeling in the snow, he spoke out loud the names of every man who had died near the bunker, German and Soviet alike. He asked forgiveness not for them, but for the war that had turned men into instruments of suffering. And then he said the only prayer he believed could help. Lord, if there is pain here, let it be released. If there is guilt, let it be forgiven. If there is silence, let it finally rest. He stayed until dawn. When he left, he placed a small wooden cross on the largest piece of rubble. It was gone by morning. But the men who found it swore the stone beneath it was warm. The final chapter of Bunker 66's story is not about destruction. It is about inheritance. After the war, the site was absorbed into collective farms. The rubble was plowed under. A wheat field now grows where the bunker once stood. There is no marker, no memorial, no trace. But in the villages nearby, old men still warn their grandchildren, "Don't walk that field at night. The ground is thin there, and what's beneath remembers." In 1998, a team of Ukrainian archaeologists excavating the area for a highway project uncovered fragments of concrete mixed with crushed bone. They also found a rusted lead box containing charred paper, Kruger's journal, partially intact. They did not publish their findings. One researcher later told a colleague, "Some doors, once opened, should not be reopened." And in 2014, during the conflict in eastern Ukraine, a group of soldiers reported hearing faint chanting near the old Kharkov line. They refused to dig trenches in the area. Their commander, a history teacher before the war, simply nodded and ordered them to move camp. Because some truths do not need proof. They only need to be remembered.
The war ended in 1945, but Bunker 66 did not die. Like a seed buried in poisoned soil, its legacy took root in the shadows of the New World Order, sprouting in secret laboratories, intelligence files, and the quiet corners of men who knew too much. The bunker was gone, the journal burned, the audio reels scattered. But the idea remained, that the human mind could be broken not by pain, but by the architecture of fear itself. And in the Cold War that followed, that idea became a weapon once more. Obersturmführer Dieter Kruger, the architect of Projekt Erde, was never captured.
In the chaos of Germany's collapse, he vanished, along with his research notes, his experimental data, and his belief that belief itself could be engineered. For years, he was presumed dead. But declassified CIA documents from 1951 tell a different story. Under the codename Orion 7, Kruger was recruited into Operation Paperclip, not for rocket science or chemical warfare, but for his work in environmental psychological conditioning. His file, stamped Top Secret Moral Hazard, notes, "Subject possesses unique insight into the manipulation of dread through spatial design, infrasound, and subliminal narrative. Recommend assignment to MK Ultra Subproject 42, Place-Based Trauma Induction." Yes, the man who built Bunker 66 was given a new lab, not in Kharkov, but in Fort Detrick, Maryland. There, he refined his methods. No longer constrained by wartime shortages, he used advanced acoustics, flicker light chambers, and isolation tanks to recreate the conditions of the Eastern Front. The goal was the same: to break a subject not by what was done to them, but by what they believed was waiting in the dark. Declassified memos show that Kruger's techniques were tested on volunteers, foreign agents, and even unwitting civilians. One 1954 report describes a subject placed in a circular room with quartz-lined walls, exposed to 18 Hz infrasound, and looped Slavic chants. Within 20 minutes, the man began weeping, confessing to crimes he hadn't committed, begging for the voice to stop. When asked what voice, he replied, "The one that knows what I did." Kruger's notes on the experiment were chillingly familiar. The enemy is not in the room. The enemy is the subject's own conscience. Our role is not to create fear, it is to remove the walls that keep it at bay. He retired in 1962 under an assumed name in New Mexico. He died in 1978. His obituary listed him as a retired acoustic engineer. No mention was made of Bunker 66, no mention of the men who broke in the dark. But his work lived on, because once you understand that silence can be weaponized, you can never unsee it. While Kruger rebuilt his legacy in America, the physical remnants of Bunker 66 quietly resurfaced. In 1967, a box of water-damaged reels and charred papers was discovered in the attic of a farmhouse near Salina, Kansas. The owner, a former U.S. Army intelligence officer named Robert L. Hayes, had served in Europe during the war. He never spoke of what he had seen, but he kept the box. Inside were fragments of Kruger's journal and 3 audio reels labeled only with dates: November 3, 1942, December 18, 1942, and January 17, 1943. Hayes never played them, but in 1989, his grandson, an audio archivist at the University of Kansas, did. What he heard was not ghosts, not demons, but something far more human. On the first reel, a young man's voice, trembling. "I took his rations. He was already weak. I told myself he wouldn't last the night anyway. But he looked at me like he knew." Then the hum, the chanting, then silence. Then, faintly, the same voice whispering, "You knew too." The second reel was worse. A soldier describing how he had abandoned a wounded comrade to save himself. Midway through, his voice breaks. He starts apologizing to the dead man, to God, to no one. Then, clear as day, a second voice, identical in tone, but colder, says, "You chose yourself, now live with it." The third reel contained only breathing, heavy, panicked, then a single sentence gasped. It's not the bunker that's haunted, it's me. The archivist donated the reels to the National Archives in 1991. They are now cataloged under RG 330 MK Ultra aired, accessible only to researchers with Level 3 clearance. Those who have listened say the same thing. It doesn't scare you, it recognizes you.
But the true legacy of Bunker 66 is not in files or reels. It is in the places we still fear. Modern science has confirmed what Kruger intuited. Infrasound, sound below 20 Hz, can induce feelings of awe, dread, and the sensation of a presence. In 2003, researchers at Coventry University played 19 Hz tones during a concert. Over 20% of attendees reported chills, anxiety, or the feeling of being watched. One woman saw a ghostly figure in the corner of the room. The frequency? 18.98 Hz, the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. It causes the retina to vibrate, creating peripheral shadows the brain interprets as movement. In other words, the ghost was in their eyes all along. This is why certain locations feel haunted. Old prisons, abandoned asylums, underground bunkers. Not because spirits linger, but because their architecture amplifies natural frequencies, distorts light, and isolates the mind from external stimuli. Bunker 66 was not magical. It was acoustically engineered. And once you know that, every dark room becomes a potential mirror. This is the final horror of Bunker 66. It was never about the occult. It was about us. About the part of the human mind that, when left alone in the dark, begins to interrogate itself. About the guilt we bury, the choices we rationalize, the faces we try to forget. In the noise of daily life, we drown them out. But in silence, in the kind of deep, echoing quiet that Bunker 66 perfected, they rise to the surface and they speak. Not in voices from beyond, but in our own. Why did you survive? What did you do to live? Who did you leave behind? The bunker didn't create these questions. It only made them impossible to ignore. And in that, it succeeded beyond Kruger's wildest dreams. Because the most effective prison is not built of concrete and steel. It is built of memory. And once you've lived in it, you carry it with you. Today, the site of Bunker 66 is a wheat field in eastern Ukraine. There is no marker, no memorial, no trace of the circular chamber, the quartz walls, or the lead-lined vault. Farmers plow the land each spring, unaware that their tractor wheels pass over the bones of belief. But in the villages nearby, the old stories persist. They say that on still nights, when the wind dies and the stars are bright, you can stand in that field and feel it. A cold spot in the air, a hum in the ground, a silence so deep it rings in your ears. And if you listen closely, you might hear it. Not a ghost, not a demon, but the echo of a question asked by every man who ever stood in the dark and wondered, am I the monster or the man who let him live? That is the truth behind Bunker 66. Not that it was haunted, but that it held up a mirror, and some men could not bear to look.